Welcome to the 2021 State of the Nuclear Energy Industry event. Here is Maria Korsnick, President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today at the start of Nuclear Innovation Week for our State of the Industry event. Nuclear Innovation Week brings together some of the brightest minds in our industry for discussion about the path forward, and I hope and expect that it will spark optimism about our future. Optimism can be in short supply these days. When we talk about the future, honestly, we mostly hear about threats. We hear about the threat of lost jobs if we can't rebuild our economy after the COVID-19 pandemic, the threat of global instability if we can't reestablish US leadership abroad, the threat of a destroyed environment if we can't reduce carbon emissions. Those threats are real. But I'm here to tell you that they are also opportunities and that nuclear energy is the key to seizing them. From good paying jobs and carbon-free electricity to US global leadership, nuclear energy is the source that can make it all work. There is no bigger opportunity in front of us than rebuilding the world's energy system around carbon-free sources. Over the last year, the conversation around the climate crisis has changed dramatically. There's no more debate about the need for swift action. When we gathered last year, there was already a widespread consensus around the need to decarbonize while meeting the world's growing demand for electricity. To avoid the worst effects of climate change, we would have to bring carbon emissions from electricity generation close to zero by 2050. And since then, utilities, state governments, and the new Biden administration have made concrete commitments for getting there even sooner, by 2035. Fortunately, as we strive to meet those commitments, the US leads the world in producing a proven, carbon-free, scalable source of electricity that enjoys bipartisan support. And that source is nuclear energy. And there's no more serious debate. It's the key to making our climate commitments work. NEI members know this and are among the leading the way. In fact, more than 75% of the 2050 carbon reduction commitments made by utilities have been made by NEI members. While we need to scale up every carbon-free source available, no other source can match nuclear energy's unique combination of attributes. Nuclear plants produce the most carbon-free electricity in the country, which is why urban and rural communities count on them for clean, reliable power around the clock. Nuclear accounts for 20% of our nation's total electricity and more than 50% of our carbon-free electricity. The value of nuclear energy's reliability has become even more apparent over the past year. During a slow-burning crisis like the pandemic, or a sudden one like the devastating winter storms across the southern US, nuclear plants have powered through unprecedented conditions. In 2020, nuclear energy became the second largest source of electricity in the United States overall. Our 55 power plants produced nearly 800 million megawatt hours, surpassing coal for the first time ever. And we're doing more with less. In 1989, it would have taken 33 additional reactors to generate the same amount of electricity that we generated in 2020. And we've done this by operating at more than 90% of capacity, a measure we call capacity factor, for the last 22 years. And we've done it all while making nuclear energy even more affordable. In terms of reliability, efficiency, and affordability, that is simply remarkable. Our ambitious climate commitments demand a reimagined energy system with our largest, most reliable carbon-free source at its center. Governments, NGOs, and the private sector all agree ambitious climate plans only work with nuclear energy. The only question is whether we're serious about making them work. We must be unequivocal about that reality, and we must act immediately. nuclear energy is the carbon-free source that will make our climate plans work. And by the same token, American ingenuity and American labor are the sources that make nuclear work. That should give us confidence and a competitive advantage in the battle against the climate crisis. Nuclear workers, from plant operators to the full supply chain, built the US fleet into one of the largest sources of carbon-free energy anywhere on Earth. And they can make nuclear energy the core of the world's clean energy system. These dedicated men and women, many of them proud union members, are absolutely essential for safely operating our current fleet and bringing the next generation of nuclear technology online. The Vogtle 3 reactor in Georgia, which is targeted to go online this year, is a testament to their determination. At its height, the project employed 8,000 people, from electricians to engineers. Undeterred by a global pandemic, they're getting the job done. And when completed, the 2 new Vogtle reactors will produce more carbon-free electricity than all 7,200 wind turbines in the state of California. Vogtle 3 and 4 will be the first reactors of their kind in the United States, and they're just the beginning. As more governments and utilities make nuclear part of their future clean energy plans, nuclear workers are poised to deliver. But to meet this moment, we need all the talent we can get. And that's why NEI and the industry as a whole are emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our ranks. A more inclusive nuclear industry is a stronger nuclear industry. And to that end, NEI is bringing together organizations like the US Women in Nuclear and North American Young Generation in Nuclear to recruit and support a diverse, talented workforce. We're having conversations along the same lines with Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy and the American Nuclear Society. This is a journey, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that we've only taken our first steps. NEI is committed to this effort because we need the top flight talent to make nuclear work for all of us. To meet the challenge before us, we need to move the next generation of nuclear rapidly from design to demonstration to build. Across the country, talented innovators are making that happen, spurred by commitments from utilities, private investment, and government support. That next generation of nuclear is poised to come online. Technologies such as small modular reactors, microreactors, and other advanced designs will make nuclear even more efficient, even more affordable, and even more versatile. These reactors will come in different sizes and designs. They'll be able to change their output, pairing perfectly with more variable sources such as wind and solar. And they bring clean electricity to hard-to-reach places where traditional reactors just don't make sense. These communities generally rely on expensive carbon-emitting sources. From Alaska and Puerto Rico to parts of the developing world, nuclear can be a game changer. And our members are working hard to deploy these technologies. There are a number of tangible examples of real progress being made. NuScale has received NRC staff approval for their design and will partner with the Utah Associated Power Systems to build small modular reactors in Idaho. Holtec is pressing forward with their SMR 160. Oklo has an advanced fission reactor under review, the first license application from an advanced reactor developer. And in Canada, Ontario Power Generation is evaluating small modular reactor designs and entered a joint venture with UltraSafe Nuclear to build a micro modular reactor. And the fuel for the nuclear fleet of the future is already under development to deliver enhanced fuels, not only for the current fleet, but also for advanced designs that require different fuel. We often talk about the path to new technologies as development to demonstration to deployment. Now, for the past few years, our attention has been on the development of new reactor designs. Last year, we turned the page. Perhaps one of the most significant advances in 2020 were the awards under the Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. With these awards, U.S. companies are able to actually build advanced reactors. These are exciting steps towards getting the next generation of nuclear online before the end of the decade. Right now, TerraPower and X-Energy are finalizing contracts with DOE for these kinds of demonstrations. And Kairos Power and Southern Company Services are finalizing contracts with DOE on risk reduction projects. General Atomics, MIT, and Advanced Reactor Concepts are all delivering their own conceptual designs. Elsewhere in the federal government, the Defense Department is moving forward with its own microreactor demonstration program to improve national security and address some of the largest threats to our armed forces. The move to demonstration is significant. These new technologies will be cost competitive, especially with carbon emitting sources. The next generation of nuclear can not only make a decarbonized energy system work, it can make it affordable. With the continued progress and the right investments and policy choices, these designs can be online before the decade is out, providing us with new technologies to reach our carbon goals. To form the core of our clean energy system, these technologies have to be successfully commercialized, moving that final step from demonstration to deployment. And decision makers understand the vital role of these technologies in meeting clean energy pledges. Utilities, including Dominion, Duke, Energy Northwest, Southern, and Xcel Energy, have shown interest in using the next generation of nuclear to meet their carbon reduction goals. And now we have to move beyond understanding and interest to action. Today, I'm calling on policymakers and executives to back up their pledges by making commitments to advance reactors as part of their energy plans. Nuclear energy also works because of hard-earned bipartisan support. In an era of continued polarization, that support is only growing stronger. Policymakers on both sides of the aisle value the jobs, carbon-free electricity, and partnerships abroad that nuclear produces. We're building an unparalleled coalition for making nuclear energy the core of our clean energy system. In 2020, House and Senate climate reports both highlighted the role of nuclear energy. Congress significantly increased appropriations to accelerate research, development, and as I just mentioned, demonstration of new technologies. And lawmakers from both sides of the aisle signed on to legislation that recognizes nuclear's contributions to today's economy and our clean energy future. Most notably, the Clean Future Act, first introduced last year, would set standards that would put the country on a path to a carbon-free energy system. The legislation would create powerful incentives to build new nuclear plants. This is an important proposal that we hope to see advance into law. This kind of comprehensive legislation will take time to pass and implement. And in the meantime, we need complementary policies to make sure the plants that we have stay online. The American Nuclear Infrastructure Act, approved by the Senate Energy and Public Works Committee last year with bipartisan support, it's a good example. It would create an incentive program for plants at risk of closure until a federal clean energy standard that properly values them is in place. We're also asking Congress to make nuclear energy a part of any broader infrastructure bill. Legislation designed to boost investment in carbon-free technologies or boost the market for carbon-free energy has to include nuclear. And finally, as our economy transitions from fossil fuels to carbon-free energy, Congress can use nuclear energy to turn the threat of unemployment into badly needed high-paying jobs. We understand the pain that plant closures cause, whether they're a nuclear or some other source. Investment in nuclear energy, targeted in communities that have long relied on fossil fuels, can not only avert job losses, but take advantage of existing talent from the fossil fuel industry. Workers from across energy sources built today's nuclear fleet, and workers from these same energy sources can help build the fleet of the 21st century. Many of the skills required, like operating a steam turbine, are highly transferable, and I know that firsthand. When I worked at a nuclear plant in Maryland and later managed one in New York, workers from fossil fuel plants would come work hand in hand with us for our scheduled refueling outages. A special incentive for advanced reactor construction in coal country would keep jobs in communities that badly need them, and it would make good on the Biden administration's promises to employ workers who can build our clean energy future. The Biden administration is already showing that it supports the key role of nuclear energy alongside other carbon-free sources. They're making ambitious commitments and have rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, a crucial step toward a clean, reliable, and affordable energy system. The administration's pledge to build back better has to mean preserving and building up our nuclear capacity. Top officials have indicated that it will. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry has stated his support for nuclear energy and especially for U.S. nuclear exports. Jennifer Granholm, the newly sworn-in Secretary of Energy, has argued that we need to be energy secure to reach net zero carbon emissions, and she stated her commitment to all emission-free technologies, which explicitly include advanced nuclear technology. These remarks fit within the Biden administration's whole of government approach to combating the climate crisis, making it clear that every part of the federal government must do its part. And that includes our industry's regulator, the NRC. As nuclear technology becomes more advanced, so should our regulatory infrastructure. The NRC must continue to update its processes, allowing us to safely bring innovations to the public just as soon as they're ready. Under its new chairman, Christopher Hansen, we expect the NRC to move forward prudently but efficiently to license new technologies. And they're on the right path. In 2020, the NRC staff recommended the first ever approval for a new small modular reactor design. The Commission also accepted the first ever license application for an advanced reactor. NRC also approved several topical reports on key aspects of GE Hitachi's small reactor design. And they approved 4 second license renewals, landmark decisions that will extend the operating life of nuclear plants and keep our carbon reduction goals in play. In 2021, 6 more applications are under review, and we expect additional renewals. We also expect that the regulatory process will reflect advancements in areas like environmental reviews, digital updates, siting, emergency preparedness, and security. And finally, to put nuclear to work, we expect the Biden administration to pursue new trade agreements and increase support for nuclear exports. Our ability to create and take advantage of opportunities abroad has enormous implications for jobs, carbon reduction, and national security. A recent study estimated that U.S. export revenues from nuclear could total as much as $1.9 trillion through 2050. That would support hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs, and many of them unionized. Maintaining that robust supply chain is crucial. The next generation of nuclear will only work if we have the supply chain to build, operate, and maintain new reactors at home and abroad. Nuclear development abroad is also a key to reducing global climate emissions. The US has set ambitious goals and it's essential that we meet them. But at the end of the day, climate change is a global threat. If the US decarbonizes, but other countries deploy carbon emitting sources to meet their growing demand, well, the consequences affect all of us. The US industry can offer unparalleled expertise and technological capabilities to countries that choose nuclear energy. And we also offer the world's highest safety standards and safeguards, and a promise to enhance, not lessen, our partners' energy independence as they reduce emissions. State-owned enterprises in Russia and China, which are the primary alternatives, do not offer the same. They play by a different set of rules. That's true of the economic tools that they use and how they leverage energy development as a tool for their geopolitical influence. When nations work together on nuclear development, the process forges deep economic and security ties that can last for 100 years. The choice of partner matters a great deal, and it's not easily undone. Simply put, the world is safer when the United States is the preferred partner for nuclear energy development. And to be that partner, we need a holistic approach that leverages the ingenuity of the US industry. We need to continue to invest in advanced nuclear technologies and support exports using every tool available. A landmark policy change last year at the Development Finance Corporation allowed support for nuclear exports. And this year, expanding financing for nuclear exports should be a priority across the government. If we do that, nuclear energy can accelerate job growth here at home, reduce carbon emissions around the world, and bolster US leadership. Our climate plans can't work if we go backwards by shuttering our nuclear plants. But that's exactly the possibility that we face. This year, 4 reactors are under threat of closure in Illinois alone. In that state, they produce twice as much clean electricity as wind and solar combined. If they shut down, carbon emitting sources will likely fill the gap. In 2020, our lost generation from coal was replaced almost entirely with natural gas. If the nuclear plants under threat this year shut down, the lost carbon-free generation would be equivalent to all the renewables that we deployed in 2019 across the entire country. That isn't decarbonizing. As the threat of climate change intensifies, we cannot afford to give away years of progress. If we do, we would sacrifice reliability. Our plants have been operating over a 90% capacity factor since the turn of the century, a mark no other source can match. We would sacrifice affordability. Study after study has shown that the only affordable path to a decarbonized electricity system includes nuclear. A recent study commissioned by Energy Northwest found that in a complete decarbonization scenario, the Pacific Northwest could save more than $8 billion every year by including nuclear, existing and new, in their clean energy mix. To avoid going backwards, we need to keep the reactors that we have online. To prevent future shutdowns, we need technology-neutral policies that put nuclear on an even playing field with other carbon-free sources like wind and solar. Many of these decisions are made at the state level, and states like Washington and Virginia, which have already passed clean energy standards, now have to build out their plans to reach net zero. And states like Illinois and Minnesota, where clean energy debates have been sidelined by COVID, well, they've now picked them back up. We're seeing dozens of state bills that support nuclear. tax incentives in Nebraska, a small modular reactor study in Montana, and funding for SMR manufacturing in Washington. We're seeing movement because these states are realizing an obvious truth. We can't talk about the urgency of decarbonizing while sacrificing our most reliable source of carbon-free electricity. We can't celebrate bold plans while conceding defeat against the climate crisis. I mean, either we're serious about building a better energy future or we aren't. Action on nuclear energy will show our true priorities. Nuclear energy is the power source that can make it all work. It can turn some of the biggest threats we face into opportunities. Our industry can create good paying jobs across the United States, aiding economic recovery as we emerge from the pandemic. We can improve public health, bringing reliable electricity to communities that currently rely on outdated, harmful sources. We can amplify US leadership on the global stage, ensuring that nuclear development happens safely and fosters energy independence. And we can reduce carbon emissions dramatically, making ambitious goals possible and averting the worst effects of a changing climate. Nuclear energy makes it all work. And that's why we all have a stake in the nuclear industry's success. If you care about economic recovery, you care about nuclear energy. If you care about public health, you care about nuclear energy. If you care about national security, you care about nuclear energy. And of course, if you care about the climate crisis, the existential threat of our time, you have to care about nuclear energy. Now is the time to get to work. Now's the time to make nuclear energy the carbon-free core of our clean energy system. Thank you.
Up next, our Q&A session with Maria Korsnick, hosted by Monica Trauzy. Please submit questions for this Q&A session using the question tool on the right-hand side of GoToWebinar.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Maria, for your remarks, wonderful remarks. I have some questions to ask you, and we'll also take some questions from the audience that I have here on my iPad. And I want to remind the audience that you are able to ask Maria questions through the question feature on the webinar. It is on the right-hand side of the screen. I encourage you to do so. I know Maria is looking forward to answering as many questions as possible today. So Maria, you spoke a lot about the Biden administration's commitment to building back better. It's a key part of this administration's agenda. What's the real opportunity that presents for nuclear energy?
Well, thanks, Monica. Nuclear energy creates high-skilled, good-paying American jobs. The Biden administration is really looking to tackle the climate crisis while bringing back the American economy. And we really sit right at the intersection of those priorities. I mean, nuclear energy could play an even greater role in our economic recovery. A recent study estimated that the US export revenues from nuclear energy could total between $1.3 to $1.9 trillion through 2050. I mean, that would support hundreds of thousands of American jobs while reducing carbon emissions and strengthening our national security.
I know you have some personal experience with the transferability of jobs from the fossil fuel industry to nuclear. You spoke a little bit about that in your address. And there's interest on this topic from the audience, specifically on the conversion that could occur from coal to nuclear. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, if you think about it, one of the most important things of siting any power plant is its connectivity to the grid. So where these coal plants are sited today, they already have that connectivity. So if you think about it, well, what's the better sense than to just put a different energy source, if you will, into what's spinning that turbine that can then be connected to the grid. So the location of these coal plants is a wonderful opportunity for us to site reactors. And then if you think of a small modular reactor, interestingly enough, they're about the same size, megawatt wise, as many of these coal plants. So I see it as a real win-win. These plants are the lifeblood of the communities that they operate in. A nuclear plant can offer that same opportunity. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity to work together with the folks that currently operate those plants that could also have roles in operating a nuclear plant.
So I know you talked about Vogtle. Aside from Vogtle, will there be other plants that are opening or plants that are renewing their operating licenses? I think this is a question on the existing fleet. What can we expect in the short term on that?
Sure. So we've already had a few plants go forward that are extending their licenses from the current 60-year to 80-year limit. And we absolutely expect several more to do likewise. Honestly, it's one of the least expensive ways to generate additional carbon-free generation is to take a site that you already have that's working very well and extend its life. And I can tell you from being a site vice president to operating in these plants for over 30 years, these plants are constantly invested in. I operated a plant that went online in 1969. And, if I were to tour you at that plant, I would tell you, it's a teenager. It has been very well maintained, very well kept up, invested, components have been replaced. So I just caution people not to sort of judge a plant by, oh my gosh, look how old it is. You got to really look into it and look at the components and look at how well it's been invested in. These plants can be safely operated for many years.
When we talk about addressing climate change, obviously some kind of federal policy is something that is discussed and comes into question. We have a member of the audience asking, how do we put nuclear on equal footing with fossil fuels, recognizing there are real environmental benefits to nuclear, which are not necessarily factored into the price structure? Would a carbon tax or some other climate-focused policy help level the playing field for nuclear?
So absolutely. I mean, just think of a clean energy standard, for example, passing a clean energy standard that would say, hey, this is a target that we all want to go for. Let's just look at the state of Washington as an example. They passed a clean energy standard there, and already that has created people focused on, well, how do you make that come true? If I really need to hit that clean energy standard target, in their case by 2045, well, then what do I need to do with my generation mix? What do I need to build in order to achieve that goal? And so a clean energy standard sends that market signal that says, hey, wait a minute, we're interested in carbon-free sources, really interested in it because it's now a target that we all have to meet, and let's figure out how to meet that. And so, think about the plants that we have today that are challenged in the marketplace. When a clean energy standard is in effect, I think it will absolutely, help those plants. And when we say an even playing field, that's really what we're asking for, a technology neutral approach. So if you're carbon free, you should get credit. And, in the past, there's been, let's say, generation specific encouragements, whether those are investment tax credits or production tax credits. And that's what creates that sort of uneven playing field. So what we're saying is, no, wait a minute, let's make it technology neutral. And if you're bringing that attribute, in this case, it's carbon free, then you should get credit.
And are there signals that you've seen from the Biden administration that this is the path that they will go down in any policies or action that's taken by this administration?
Well, I think you've already seen signals by this administration that they're really interested and they're very focused on a carbon-free future by the actions they've taken, as we mentioned, re-signing on the Paris Accord. 2050 is an aggressive target, and they said 2035. And so I think in ways that they can, they're really signaling that. Now, Congress has a variety of bills that they're looking at and considering, but absolutely, I would say that this administration is serious, and Congress is looking at ways to meet those goals. A clean energy standard is one of them. There's several pieces of legislation that are there, but and the whole, I would say, the nuclear plants, they need something now to really show that we value that clean energy until, say, a clean energy standard kicks in. And so, there's some legislation out there now that begins to address that. I mentioned one in my talk, the American Nuclear Infrastructure Act. There's other possibilities, but it's just very, very important that we get this carbon-free recognition in the market.
And we know that part of this conversation is the expected or potential closure of some plants. Question from the audience: when can we expect to see some kind of government action regarding possible policies to support nuclear plants that are slated for closure this year?
Yeah, so a lot of the focus right now, I mentioned the 4 plants in Illinois. Right now, the focus is at the state level, for example, because the state has an ability to take some action. And in addition, obviously, we're working at the federal level, broadly. But we would expect that the Illinois state government is very focused on this, and will be focused on this here and now in their spring session. And I know there's a lot of strong advocates that will be weighing in on those plants' behalf for the good paying jobs, for the clean energy that they provide. And it just gives us even more momentum, if you will, to push for the federal clean energy legislation as well.
Let's talk about used fuel for a moment. Without addressing kind of all of the aspects of used fuel, how can new nuclear really move forward? What is the path towards a solution there? And talk a little bit about the safe management as well of the fuel, and how all of that will be accounted for as we move forward.
All right, sure. So from a used fuel perspective, we'll start by just saying all of the used fuel that's been generated from any of the commercial reactors is safely stored where it's at today. It's protected, it's monitored, it's very well situated. But that doesn't mean that it's the most efficient way to store all of that fuel, because it's dispersed at many, many different sites. And one of the things that the Biden administration has signaled is an interest to make some progress on the used fuel conversation. And we really welcome that. We welcome the fact that we need to move forward with used fuel. If you step back for a minute and you look at other countries that deploy nuclear energy, they're making better progress than we are. I look over at Finland. I think their repository is going to go into operation maybe 2025. Sweden is making some progress. Japan is making some progress. Canada is making some progress. Not so much for us. And so it's really an opportunity for us to step back and say, hey, you know what? We're better than this. We need to find a way to move forward. And I think part of that way is to figure out how to store the fuel we have right now more efficiently. So probably putting it in locations that we could collect it together. So think of interim storage. And then ultimately, we need to find a long-term repository. But we're very happy to work with the Biden administration to find a way forward.
And is NEI also working with environmental NGOs, for example, on finding a path forward on fuel?
Absolutely, yes. We have embraced and reached out to several NGOs, and yeah, very happy to collaborate and work together.
Maria, I know we were all watching the stories coming out of Texas not too long ago, and obviously nuclear was a part of the conversation there. Can you talk a bit about how nuclear performed during the storm in Texas and kind of what it means for the role that nuclear plays moving forward as we have more unexpected weather?
Well, sure. Let's start, and I know Texas was so much in the news, but there was some poor weather, I'd say, sort of across many of the southern states. And I would just step back for a minute and say, overall, during that very challenging time, nuclear operated at a 94% capacity factor. So just once again, really demonstrating and showing that it can operate through some very challenging times. And it also is a testament to why you need a diverse portfolio in your electric generation so that you have an opportunity to ensure that you're reliable and sort of through a lot of these challenges. So it is true that there was one of the nuclear plants that went offline during this time. And it's also true that plant came back in just about a day later. So again, it reinforces the resilience and it reinforces that on-site fuel supply that it was able to rebound so quickly. And quite frankly, it's just a testament to just how resilient that these stations are and how important it is for the marketplace to value that dispatchable, carbon-free, resilient source.
I love this next question from the audience because it's something I'm passionate about and actually get to work on a little bit with some of our colleagues here at NEI, and it's about investments. How can we attract the necessary investments in advanced nuclear ahead of license approval from the NRC? How do we jumpstart some of the action right now?
Well, yeah, thanks, Monica. In fact, I would say that there's a lot of private investment out there that is already looking into nuclear and quite frankly, very interested to weigh in and engage. And I think some of the companies, quite frankly, that I mentioned during my speech, have been the beneficiary of some of that investment. And so the reality is connecting nuclear and carbon-free and realizing from an ESG perspective, nuclear fits, it checks all of those boxes, right? It's environmentally kind, it's very conscious in terms of the existential threat of our time, that carbon-free attribute, and the fact that it's resilient and it's there and it's dispatchable. And if you think ahead, nuclear is more than electricity, right? So there's electricity, there's the opportunity to generate hydrogen, there's the opportunity for high temperature steam. I mean, you can't just think about the today world and say, how are we going to be ready, right? You got to look at tomorrow and say, hey, what are we going to do tomorrow? Well, we're going to want more hydrogen and we're going to have to get off carbon sources, not just in the electricity sector, but in the manufacturing sector and the transportation sector. So you got to think about, whoa, geez, in that world, what other things do I need? And these things like hydrogen and these things like a high temperature steam supply, they're going to be really, really needed in the manufacturing sector and in sort of this economy, if you will, of our future. And so all of a sudden, this nuclear plant, it becomes a pretty attractive asset because it can do a lot of those things.
Marie, we have time for one final question. Jeremy Dillon at E&E is asking about the House Democrat climate bill. He says, your statement on the bill sounds like you are all more supportive of a clean energy standard than other climate policy mechanisms. Is that accurate? Is that support in lieu of carbon tax policy or some other overarching climate plan? Just a little clarity on where the support is.
Well, we're real supportive of something we think can get across the finish line, okay? And so, I'm not trying to say, oh, carbon tax wouldn't be interesting. Honestly, you got to get something across the finish line for it to be effective. And so when you see us leaning into that clean energy standard, it's simply because that's our view, that there's an opportunity there for that to make it across the finish line. At the end of the day, we're supportive of things that recognize carbon and give nuclear due credit.
Maria, thank you so much for your leadership and your passion for our globally critical industry.
Great. Thank you, Monica.